All right, so recently there's been some terror attacks in France. I think there's been like three in the last week or so, and it's drawn a lot of outrage in Japan, or not Japan, in France. And even the prime minister there, Macron, has prior to this, he's kind of bit of a pushover to say the least, but recently he's actually started to speak out against radical Islam, which is very good because it's something we need to be doing. But um, never to be outdone, Justin Trudeau is asked about his thoughts on the idea, and he said, I don't know what the exact quote was, but you'd have to go look that up if you wanted to get it. But nonetheless, Tom Quiggin points out here, Trudeau says there are limits to free speech, but no comment on this, which is a Canadian Imam Yunois Kathrada was I'm not going to say the stuff he said, but I mean he said some pretty bad stuff, and I mean this is the thing too that these radical Islamists can do and say pretty much whatever they want unabated, and that is a big problem in society. And the big problem is, I mean, I think there's a lot of big problems. The first one being, and what the main thing I wanted to bring up here is that Canada is in a world of hurt. Now, again, like a lot of people you talk to these days, they're like, oh, why are you so pessimist? All of it pessimistic, I guess. Why? But here's the thing when it comes to that is that the only way that we can function going forward is if we're realists, right? There's pessimists, there's optimists, and there's realists, and that's what we need to be. And the reality is that Canada is not doing good in any way, shape, or form right now. Like, in what way can someone legitimately point out, be like, hey, Canada's in good shape for reason X? Like, what is it? I can't think of anything. I seriously can't. Now, again, the leftists would point out all the free crap that we give out, but that's not a good sign, right? That's like someone saying, "Oh yeah, I quit my job. I'm living off credit cards and lines of credit, and I got a second mortgage and all this garbage." But yeah, you're doing really good in the here and now, but in the long run, you're not. And that's what we're doing in Canada right now. Is that, I mean, we're not even doing very good in the here and now, but down the road, we're going to be in horrible shape if we keep going the way we're going. And why is that? Well, number one, the financial aspect of it, which I've gone over a lot. But the specifically here is that we have a prime minister and most major left-wing in fact, I would say probably almost all of them, major left-wing politicians, and even a lot of conservatives, to be fair as well, they don't believe in the concept of free speech, right? And I've been over this a million times, but there's still so many people that don't understand it that it's not even funny. So I'll bring it up briefly, and that hardly anybody directly says they don't believe in the concept of free speech. The problem always arises that they'll say, "Oh, I'm for free speech," but they'll have their big long list of exceptions, right? No hate speech, no Islamophobia, and but here's the thing: if you don't believe in speech that you disagree with, then you don't believe in free speech by definition, right? And when you inevitably point out how stupid the idea of hate speech not being covered under free speech, how stupid of an idea that is, they'll inevitably pivot to the, oh, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, or you can't call for violence, or something along those lines. Well, those things are already illegal. I mean, technically, I don't believe it is illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater, but if you did do that and everybody starts crowding out, and let's say someone trips and falls and breaks their neck or something, yeah, you will be held liable for that. So there's already laws on the books that protect against all of the legitimate whatabouts, right? Like there's already laws on the books for all that kind of stuff. So there's nothing that needs to be changed. If anything, free speech needs to be expanded because the problem in Canada is that although technically we do have free speech on paper, the courts oftentimes don't hold it up, right? Like if misgendering someone is not allowed, then we don't have free speech, right? We don't have free speech. Now, again, I don't believe that you should do that, but again, the whole point of free speech is that it exists to protect unpopular speech, right? That's the whole point of it because if it only existed to protect the speech of what the majority of people believe is free speech, then it wouldn't need to exist in the first place because the majority of people already agree with it, right? So again, that's the first thing I wanted to bring up. So The next thing is from Maxime Bernier here, replying to a Toronto Star tweet and article saying cancer surgeons in Ontario are reporting a sharp rise in the number of people coming to the hospital with advanced cancers. It's an unintended consequence of the sudden shutdown of non-urgent healthcare services during the wave of you know what. Maxime Bernier says it's not an unintended consequence, it's a result of a panicky decision by politicians and bureaucrats to focus on the virus only without talking about the consequences. And because of their incompetence, more people will die of other causes than of the virus. Now, again, we've known about this for months. It's so boring having to bring this up and so tiring, but the reason I do it is because there's still so many people out there, probably not people watching this, unfortunately, but nonetheless, there's so many people out there that genuinely believe that there's no unintended consequences to the lockdowns. There's none. There's no unintended consequences to mask mandates. And it shows just how ignorant they are. For the simple reason that the first thing that to understand economics and how an economy functions, right? The first one of the first things you need to understand is that when you're thinking about implementing a policy, whatever it is, you need to evaluate what the potential unintended consequences of said policy would be. That is one of the most basic laws of economics, right? And the fact that probably 90% of the population doesn't understand this just goes to show just how ignorant the average person is these days, right? And that's basically that's basically why I'm here is to, I'm no expert in any one topic, but I know a heck of a lot more than the average person about a lot of things, simply because to know a lot more than the average person about most things these days, you don't actually have to know that much. So anyway, that's another thing to bring up that like I say, I've been bringing it up for a long time, but like I say, so many people still have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, and they genuinely believe that if you lock down, there's going to be no adverse, people suffering from depression. There's going to be no adverse alcoholism, drug addiction, which we know. Um, since opioid deaths, and drug overdoses in general have gone way up over the last 6 months or so, yeah, it's safe to say that depression and anxiety are through the roof, and more people are dying because of these other causes than from the virus. And the other thing to point out too is that the vast majority of people that are committing suicide and overdosing, they're younger people, right? They're younger people. On the flip side, the vast majority of people dying from the virus are very old, right? They're very old. So this idea that we're somehow saving lives of this has got to be one of the most insane ideas I've possibly heard. Number one, because we're not saving lives. More people are dying from other causes due to adverse effects from the lockdown. And on the flip side, like I say, I think way more people will die as well down the road because of missed cancer screenings. Maybe someone has so much depression that builds up over 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road because of this. Maybe because kid doesn't grow up with a dad or a mom, they suffer very bad mental health conditions, and we society won't see that for another decade or two, right? So this is the problem, that there's no real way of measuring the amount of deaths that are caused from the lockdowns. There's no way of measuring it because it's so hard to tell, right? It would take so much money that it would be impossible to do it, right? So this is the problem. There's no real way of knowing, and that we are technically guessing. But here's the other thing on the flip side: we don't know that everyone that's dying from the quote unquote virus, that they're actually dying from it. We know that many of the people are dying from other causes, and they simply happen to have the virus, and therefore they're considered a death. So that's the other thing too, is that the virus deaths are inflated to a pretty high degree. I would say it's at least 10 to 20% of the people dying from the virus are not actually dying from the virus. So that's another thing people need to keep in mind. And this is from David Samadi. He says under 6% of patients in hospitals are from virus patients. And again, this is another thing that shows that you have all these people talking about, oh, there's hospitals in this area that are overwhelmed and they're at 95% capacity and blah, 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 blah. But what they don't realize is that in the States, and Canada as well to a degree, because contrary to popular belief, Canadian hospitals still have to make money, right? If they're losing money, they will get shut down because we don't have an endless supply of money to pump into hospitals that are losing money. But in the States, they absolutely have to, because Canada, maybe we can just run a larger deficit or tax more or some garbage like that. But here's the thing. I don't even work in the healthcare industry, and I know that. And I've seen people who are in the healthcare industry that are talking about, oh, we're at 95% capacity. Oh, the world's gonna end. Well, no, that's how hospitals work. That's how hospitals work. They have to be close to capacity, if not at capacity, to make money, right? It's just the insanity of these people is off the charts, right? It's absolutely off the charts. So, um, anyway, this is another graph that just points to the fact that we are still grossly overreacting to this. And the reason like I always mention that I talk about this so much is that there's a very large percent of the population that they're not going to change their mind on this topic. Like they're not going to change their mind on this topic, which is why we have to be so hell bent on pushing back against their paranoid delusional worldview. And the last thing to bring up is some good news here from the post millennial. Over 1,000 gather in Toronto for anti-lockdown march. Now, again, these are going on in major cities across Canada. It seems like once a week at least. There was one in Vancouver recently as well, which is good news. It's good news that more and more people are waking up to the absolute lie that we have been sold, that somehow these lockdowns are saving lives, because they are not saving lives, right? They're not saving lives. It is absolutely laughable to suggest that we are saving lives by doing this, right? And here's the argument that you always make to these people. You'll tell them about how wrong we were about the predictions, and they'll be like, oh, well, we didn't know anything back then. Well, we know things now, and you're still not changing your minds. Like the insanity of these people is absolutely off the charts. Like it's absolutely off the charts. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up today. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure you follow me on those other platforms. Make sure you check me out there. Those links are all in the description if you want to support me. I also got Patreon and the email address for that if you'd like. But like I say, at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe, and check me out on those other areas.